You have been waiting, not consciously, not with a calendar and a clock, but in the background of every day there is a part of you that still believes rescue is possible, that someone will finally see what you have been carrying, that someone will step in, speak up, reach out, and make it all make sense. A parent who finally understands, a partner who finally shows up, a friend who finally notices, a stranger who finally says the exact words you have needed to hear. The waiting is so constant, so woven into the fabric of your normal that you have forgotten it is happening, until one day something shifts. A small disappointment, a cancelled plan, a moment of need met with silence, and the floor drops out. Not because something terrible happened, because nothing happened, because the rescue you have been waiting for did not arrive. Again. And in that moment you understand, nobody is coming, nobody was ever coming, and the life you have been postponing, the self you have been holding back, the risks you have been avoiding, because you thought someone would give you permission. They are all yours now. Entirely. Terrifyingly. Finally. If you're ready to understand what happens when the waiting ends and the living begins, hit that like button and subscribe. This channel explores the truths that arrive when illusions finally collapse. The fantasy of the witness. Every child is born waiting, waiting to be seen, to be known, to be held in a gaze that says, "You are here, you matter, your existence is not a mistake." For some, this gaze arrives, imperfect, intermittent, but real enough to build a self upon. For others, it never does. Or it arrives twisted, conditional, withdrawn, the moment the child becomes inconvenient, and the child learns to wait harder, to perform better, to become whatever might finally secure the attention that feels like oxygen. Jung called this the complex of the abandoned child, not necessarily abandoned physically, abandoned emotionally, left to hold feelings too large for a small body, left to make sense of a world that offers no explanation, left to raise itself while the adults around it remain absorbed in their own unfinished business. The child grows into an adult, but the waiting does not stop, it transforms. It becomes the hope that a partner will finally provide what the parent did not, that a friend will finally see what the family ignored, that success will finally validate what was never validated, that somewhere, someday, someone will arrive and say, "I see you, I have always seen you," and the waiting will be over. This is the fantasy of the witness, the belief that your story requires an audience to be real, that your pain requires recognition to be legitimate, that your self requires reflection in others' eyes to exist. It is not love you are waiting for. It is completion, the completion of a self that was never allowed to fully form. And it is a fantasy, not because people are cruel, not because the world is cold, but because no human being can complete what was left incomplete in your formation. No partner can parent you. No friend can replace the family you needed. No stranger's validation can retroactively validate a childhood that felt invisible. The witness you are waiting for does not exist. Not because the world lacks good people, because the completion you seek is an inside job. It always was. The collapse of the waiting self, the day nobody comes, is not the worst day. It is the most honest day. It is the day the fantasy dies and the self must either emerge or disappear entirely. Most people avoid this day. They avoid it by changing the object of waiting. The parent failed, so they wait for a partner. The partner failed, so they wait for a child. The child is too burdened, so they wait for a friend, a guru, a therapist, a deity. The waiting shifts, but never stops. The fantasy adapts, but never dies. And the self remains in suspension, perpetually postponed, waiting for the external authorization that will never arrive. Jung treated patients who had spent decades in this suspension. Successful people, accomplished people, people who looked fine from the outside and were hollow on the inside. They came to him with symptoms that seemed unrelated. Depression that medication did not touch. Anxiety that had no object. Relationships that repeated the same pattern of waiting and disappointment. Careers that felt like performances for an audience that never showed up. The treatment was not to find the witness. It was to kill the waiting, to help the patient understand that the rescue they sought was not delayed. It was impossible, not because they were unworthy, because the structure of their need made it so. They were asking another person to do what only they could do, to see themselves, to validate themselves, to become the parent, the partner, the friend they had never had to themselves. This is the word Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you are, without external permission. And it begins with the collapse of the waiting self, the recognition that the life you have been living is a rehearsal, a preparation for a moment that will never come. And the only life available is the one you create without the witness, without the rescue, without the completion that fantasy promised. The terror of self-authorization. If nobody is coming, then you must authorize yourself. This sounds simple. It is the hardest thing you will ever do. Authorization is the permission to exist, to want, to need, to take up space, to make noise, to be inconvenient, to be seen, to be real. Most people received this permission incompletely, or not at all. They learned to exist conditionally, to want only what was acceptable, to need only what was acceptable, to need only what was convenient, to take up as little space as possible, to make no noise that might disturb, to be easy, manageable, invisible. Self-authorization means revoking these conditions. It means saying, I exist because I exist, not because I am useful, not because I am pleasing, not because I have earned my place through suffering or achievement. I exist, period. And my existence entitles me to want, to need, to take space, to make noise, to be difficult, to be real. The terror of this statement is profound, because it means giving up the fantasy that someone else will provide what you cannot provide yourself. It means accepting that there is no parent coming to make it okay, no partner coming to make it whole, no authority coming to make it legitimate. You are the authority. You are the parent. You are the witness. And if you fail to show up for yourself, nobody else will. Jung's patients faced this terror in analysis, the slow, grinding recognition that their symptoms were not obstacles to their life. They were their life. The depression was the consequence of waiting. The anxiety was the consequence of postponed authorization. The relationships were the repetition of childhood patterns because the self had never developed the capacity to choose differently. The treatment was not insight alone. Insight without action changes nothing. The treatment was action without permission. The patient had to begin doing what they had been waiting for someone else to enable. Setting boundaries, expressing needs, pursuing desires, taking risks, making noise, being difficult, being real, without guarantee, without safety net, without the fantasy that someone would catch them if they fell. The grief of becoming real. The day you realize nobody is coming is a day of grief, not depression. Grief, the specific sorrow of losing something you never had but always believed was possible. You grieve the parent who finally understands, the partner who finally shows up, the friend who finally notices, the life that finally begins when the waiting ends. These were not real, but they were real to you. They structured your hope. They organized your postponement. They gave meaning to your suffering by making it temporary, a prelude to the arrival that would transform everything. Without them, you are left with what is. The actual parent, limited, wounded, unable to give what they never had. The actual partner, human, busy, carrying their own unfinished business. The actual friends, occasional distracted, struggling with their own visibility. The actual life, unglamorous, uncertain, entirely yours to make or waste. This grief is necessary. It is the funeral of the fantasy. And funerals are not celebrations. They are reckonings, with what was hoped for, with what was invested, with what was lost. The years spent waiting, the energy spent performing, the self spent in preparation for a life that was always postponed. Jung believed that grief, fully experienced, transforms into something else, not happiness, not optimism, but substance. The substance of a self that has faced reality without fantasy, That has accepted limitation without despair. That has found in the ashes of the waiting self the materials for a real self. This transformation is not quick. It is not linear. It includes periods of rage, of bargaining, of desperate attempts to revive the fantasy with new objects. The new partner who will be different. The new friend who will finally see. The new project that will finally validate. These are the death throes of the waiting self. The refusal to accept that the structure itself is flawed, not merely the latest object of its hope. But eventually, if the work continues, the grief settles. The fantasy dies completely, and in its place, something unexpected emerges. Not joy, not peace, but freedom. The freedom of a self that no longer waits, that no longer postpones, that no longer delegates its authorization to someone who may or may not arrive. The emergence of the self. When the waiting ends, the self must emerge. Not the persona, not the performance, not the carefully constructed social face designed to attract the witness. The real self, the self that was always there, buried under layers of adaptation, compromise, and hope deferred. This self is not impressive. It is not charismatic. It is not the hero of a story. It is ordinary, contradictory, sometimes petty, sometimes generous, sometimes frightened, sometimes brave. It contains everything the persona excluded: the anger, the selfishness, the neediness, the ambition, the messiness of being human without the editing required for social consumption. Jung called this the self with a capital S, the center of the psyche, the organizing principle that emerges when the persona collapses and the shadow is integrated. Not a perfect self, a whole self, capable of containing opposites without splitting. Capable of being difficult and kind, frightened and brave, needy and generous, without requiring one to cancel the other. The emergence of this self is not comfortable. It disrupts relationships built on the old performance. People who loved your persona may not love your reality. They may feel betrayed by your boundaries, confused by your needs, abandoned by your refusal to perform the function you once performed. This is not cruelty on your part. It is the inevitable consequence of becoming real. Some relationships will survive, adapted to the new terms, based on mutual reality rather than mutual performance. These are the real ones, the ones worth keeping. Others will end, not dramatically, often quietly. The slow drifting apart of people who no longer fit because one has stopped pretending. This loss is part of the process. The persona was not just your prison. It was your connection to many people. The price of freedom is the price of these connections. Not all of them, but enough to feel the cost, enough to make the choice real. The work of no longer waiting. The day nobody comes is not the end of the work. It is the beginning. The work of building a life without the fantasy of rescue, of creating meaning without the guarantee of witness, of authorizing yourself every day in every choice without the external validation that once structured your existence. This work is invisible. It does not produce dramatic results. It produces small changes. The boundary finally set, the need finally expressed, the risk finally taken, the no finally spoken. Each small act of self-authorization builds the muscle. Each small rejection of the waiting pattern weakens the complex. Jung's concept of active imagination is useful here, the practice of dialoguing with the parts of yourself that the waiting self ignored. The inner child who still hopes, the inner parent who is cruel or absent, the inner witness who is finally you. These dialogues are not fantasy. They are the construction of internal structure, the building of the parent, the partner, the friend you needed inside yourself. The work also includes the body. The waiting self lives in tension, held breath, clenched jaw, tight shoulders. The physical preparation for a blow that never comes, a rescue that never arrives. Releasing this tension is part of becoming real, learning to breathe fully, to rest completely, to occupy space physically as well as psychologically. And the work includes action in the world, not waiting for the perfect moment, not waiting for the right feeling, not waiting for permission, acting with the understanding that the outcome is uncertain, the support is not guaranteed, and the responsibility is entirely yours. The freedom of nobody coming there is a freedom that arrives when the fantasy finally dies. Not immediately, not cleanly, but eventually. The freedom of no longer performing for an audience that is not there. The freedom of no longer postponing your life for a rescue that will not arrive. The freedom of no longer delegating your worth to someone else's recognition. The freedom of being entirely, completely, irrevocably your own. This freedom is not comfortable. It is not warm. It does not come with applause. It comes with silence. The silence of a life that is finally yours to author. The silence of choices that have no one to blame but yourself. The silence of a self that is real enough to be lonely, uncertain, and fully alive. Jung believed that this freedom was the goal of psychological development. Not happiness, not success, not the elimination of suffering, but the capacity to suffer consciously, to choose deliberately, to live fully in the reality that nobody is coming, that nobody was ever coming, and that this is not tragedy but the simple condition of existence. The person who integrates this freedom does not become cold, does not become cynical, does not stop loving, connecting, caring, but they love differently. They connect from fullness rather than need. They care without the hidden contract of reciprocity. They give without the unconscious demand that the gift purchase the witness they no longer seek. This is the paradox. The day you realize nobody is coming is the day you finally become capable of real relationship, because real relationship requires two whole people, two selves who do not need each other to complete what is incomplete, who choose each other rather than needing each other, who meet as equals rather than as rescuer and rescued. Conclusion: you have been waiting. For years, for decades, possibly for your whole life, waiting for someone to see what you carry, to validate what you feel, to authorize what you want, to make the waiting finally end. The waiting is the problem, not the absence of the person you wait for. The waiting itself, the postponement of your life for a rescue that cannot arrive because the structure of your need makes it impossible. No human being can complete what was left incomplete in your formation. No external witness can authorize what only you can authorize. Carl Jung's psychology offers a path through this waiting, not to find the witness, to become the witness, to kill the fantasy and build the self, to grieve what was never had and create what is possible, to authorize yourself, day by day, choice by choice, until the waiting self is replaced by the living self. The day nobody comes as the day everything begins, not with joy, not with ease, but with honesty, with the recognition that your life is yours, entirely, terrifyingly, finally. If this names something you have been avoiding, if it touched the part of you that is still waiting, subscribe to this channel. We explore the truths that emerge when illusions collapse. Like this video, if it made you feel the floor drop out in the right way. Share it with someone who is still waiting for someone who will never arrive. Comment below with what you have been postponing, what you are ready to authorize, what you will begin now that the waiting is over. Nobody is coming. And that is not the end of hope. It is the beginning of you. Goodbye.